At the Christmas party, my millionaire son pulled me into a hug and said, "Loving the $5,000 a month, Mom?" I froze. My face went pale. I whispered, "Son, I'm working 2 jobs." That's when my greedy daughter-in-law nearly dropped her drink. "I'm so glad you're here. Stick with me through the end, and drop your city in the comments so I can see how far this story travels." I'm Doreen. I'm 65. And I thought by now I'd seen every kind of heartbreak life could hand out. But I was wrong. Nothing prepared me for what unfolded at my son's Christmas party last December, how my world cracked open with a single sentence. The party was exactly what I expected from Boyd and his wife Edna, over the top, glossy, and cold. Their house looked like it was ripped from a luxury catalog, gleaming marble floors, chandeliers that dripped crystals, and guests who smelled like money. I stood off to the side, wearing the best dress I owned, a navy blue one I bought on sale 3 years ago. Feeling like a stranger in my own family. My feet ached. I'd just come off an 8-hour cashier shift at the grocery store. Before that, I'd spent the morning cleaning law offices downtown. 2 jobs to survive. Not by choice, but by necessity. My social security didn't stretch far enough to cover rent, let alone groceries and medication. Across the room, Boyd looked like a man who had everything figured out. He was tall, sharp in a tailored suit that probably cost more than my monthly income. Laughing with other businesspeople, swirling a glass of whiskey I knew cost more than a week's worth of groceries. Despite everything, pride welled up in my chest. He'd made something of himself. And I had given everything I had to make sure he could. Edna moved through the crowd like a queen. She was flawless, blonde, elegant, always dressed in designer clothes. But every time her eyes landed on me, there was something hard in them. Dismissive. As if I were an old coat someone had forgotten to hang up. I was reaching for a tiny sandwich from the buffet table when Boyd appeared beside me. He'd had a few drinks, I could tell from the way he smiled too widely and leaned in a little too close. "Mom," he said, wrapping an arm around my shoulders. "You look great." "Really?" "Thank you, sweetheart," I said politely. "The party is beautiful. You and Edna really went all out." He nodded, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. "I'm just glad you're here," he added. Then, with a casual shrug and a tone that almost sounded like a joke, he said, "You've been enjoying the $5,000 a month, right? Living a little, I hope." It hit me like a slap. I felt the color drain from my face. My knees went weak. 5,000? I asked, barely able to get the words out. "What are you talking about?" Boyd blinked, confused. "The money I've been sending you, every month. I set up automatic transfers years ago. Edna helped me arrange everything. She said you wouldn't ask for help, but that you needed it." I grabbed his arm, my heart racing. "Boyd, I haven't received a cent. I've been working morning and night just to keep a roof over my head." The music and laughter around us kept going, but it felt like it was all spinning. Boyd turned pale. "That can't be right," he said, stunned. "I've been sending it." I thought," Edna said. We both turned to look at her. She was standing by the Christmas tree, a shrimp cocktail raised halfway to her lips. But she wasn't eating. She was staring at us, frozen, like someone who had just seen a ghost. Our eyes locked, and in that instant, I saw the truth. Her mask cracked wide open. Guilt. Panic. And a flicker of raw fear. She started coughing, gasping for air. But it wasn't the shrimp, she was choking on the realization that her secret had just been exposed. The shrimp fell to the floor, untouched. Boyd rushed to her side, patting her back, asking what was wrong. But she never looked at him, her wide, terrified eyes stayed fixed on me. And in them, I saw 3 years of deception. 3 years of stolen support. 3 years of letting me suffer while she lived in comfort, all while smiling to my face. The room swam around me. The chatter faded into background noise. All I could think about was the month I couldn't pay my rent. The medications I skipped. The dinners I went without. While she lived in designer luxury, I was counting change at the pharmacy. A few guests started noticing the commotion. One asked if we needed a doctor. But the damage was already done. And for the first time in years, I wasn't the one feeling ashamed. The money, I said quietly to Boyd as he continued to help Edna, who was still trying to catch her breath. Where exactly did you send the money? He looked up at me, his expression shifting from confusion to something far darker. To your account, the one Edna set up. She said it would be easier that way. Said you were getting older and it might be hard for you to manage everything. Edna had stopped coughing, but she was still gasping quietly, eyes locked on mine like a deer caught in headlights. She knew. She knew I'd figured it out, and that the polished life she'd built on lies was seconds away from falling apart. Something icy and sharp settled in my chest. Not rage. Not yet. Just a chilling, crystal-clear awareness that I had been deeply, intentionally betrayed. By the very two people who should have shielded me. The party kept going as if nothing had happened. Laughter buzzed in the background. Glasses clinked. Music played. But for me, the air had changed. It was thinner, colder. I looked around at the glossy walls, the chandelier twinkling above, and realized that at least some of this luxury, this grand holiday display, was built with money meant to keep me from breaking my back at age 65. Edna finally straightened up, smoothed her dress, trying to act unbothered. But her hands trembled. And when she met my eyes again, I saw something new. Fear. For the first time in all these years, she was afraid of me. And I, after 3 long years of struggle and silence, felt something stir inside me that I hadn't felt in a very long time. Strength. Real, quiet strength. I stood in that lavish room and looked into the face of a woman unraveling, and for the first time in forever, I didn't feel small. I felt powerful. My mind wandered, uninvited, back to another time, when Boyd needed me like air. Funny how memory works, it comes to haunt you when you least expect it, throwing light on everything you lost. I was 32 when Robert, my husband, died of a heart attack. He was just 35. There was no warning, no time to say goodbye. One moment, we were all at breakfast, Boyd giggling at his dad's silly jokes. The next, Robert was gone. He left me with a 5-year-old and a pile of medical bills, insurance barely dented. The months that followed were a blur of grief and survival. Boyd would wake up sobbing for his dad every night. I'd hold him close, whispering comfort I didn't believe myself. I'll never forget one night. Boyd looking up at me with those wide brown eyes, the same eyes that now barely see me, and asking, "When's Daddy coming back?" "Daddy's not coming back, sweetheart," I said, brushing back his hair, tears slipping onto his tiny shoulders. "But Mommy's here. And I'm not going anywhere." And I meant it. I was there for every scraped knee, every school form, every moment he needed someone to stand between him and the world. I worked 3 jobs, cleaning offices before sunrise, waiting tables during the day, sewing at night. My hands were always sore, my back screamed, and sleep came in 3-hour snatches, if at all. But Boyd never saw any of that. I made sure of it. He wanted to join Little League. I sold my wedding ring to pay the fees and buy him a glove. He needed school clothes. I wore the same 3 outfits for 2 years so he could fit in with the other kids. When he got sick, I took extra shifts and paid in cash at clinics that didn't ask too many questions, because health insurance was a luxury I couldn't afford. I remember the day he came home with a permission slip for a field trip to the Science Museum. The cost? $25. I had 12 to my name. Rent was due in 3 days. That night, after he went to sleep, I walked 6 blocks to the pawn shop. I sold the last thing of value I had, my mother's necklace. He gave me $30 for it. It was worth so much more, but I didn't haggle. Boyd went on that field trip. He never knew what it really cost. high school was harder. He was gifted, bright, driven. He wanted to take honors classes that came with expensive materials. He joined debate, computer club, academic teams. Each one meant more money I didn't have. But I found it. I borrowed. I begged. I worked every holiday shift, Christmas, New Year's, Easter, because that extra pay meant he got the calculator he needed, the chemistry kit he begged for, the clothes that helped him blend in with kids whose parents had real careers. Then came college. Boyd got into a top-tier university with a partial scholarship. But the rest? 30 grand a year. I took out a second mortgage on the tiny house I had scraped and saved for. I pushed myself past the breaking point, physically, emotionally, financially. By the time he graduated, I was 10 years older in every sense. My hair had gone fully gray. Arthritis crept into my joints. High blood pressure became my shadow. But when he called to say he made the dean's list, or landed an internship, or got a job offer, it felt worth it. Every sacrifice. Every night I went to bed sore and alone. He graduated summa cum laude with a degree in computer science and landed a job at a startup that made him a millionaire. I cried at his graduation. Not just from pride, but from relief. I believed, truly believed, that all the hardship was behind us. I had no idea the real heartbreak was still waiting for me. Not in loss, but in betrayal. It wasn't just pride in Boyd's success, it was the feeling that everything I'd given up had finally amounted to something. All those years of sacrifice had, at last, meant something. But things shifted after he graduated. He moved across the country for his job, and our phone calls became fewer and farther between. He was always busy, important meetings, high-stakes projects, networking events. I didn't push. I figured he was doing exactly what I'd worked so hard to help him do, build a career. A life. And then he met Edna. From the very first moment I met her, I knew she didn't care for me. Not through her words, Edna was far too polished for that. It was in the way her eyes lingered on my second-hand clothes, on my rough, work-worn hands, on the outdated furniture in my modest little house. She assessed me and, silently, dismissed me. Not worthy. Not useful. Not good enough. Over time, Boyd's visits dwindled. Every time he planned a trip, something urgent came up. A business trip. A social event. Always something Edna deemed more important. When I'd call, it was Edna who answered. Polite, but clipped, like she was doing me a favor. Boyd's in a meeting, she'd say. Or, he's swamped this week, Doreen. Try again later. Eventually, the calls stopped altogether. All I got were birthday cards, and expensive gifts that didn't fit my life, silk scarves I had no occasion to wear, gadgets I didn't know how to use. He stopped asking how I was. He stopped checking if I needed anything. I told myself it was just how life worked. Sons grow up. They marry, they move on. I'd done my part. Raised him. Gave him every chance. The loneliness was just part of the deal, I thought, part of being an aging mother whose son had outgrown her. But standing in that mansion, surrounded by marble floors and crystal chandeliers, comparing their furniture to what I lived on each month, I felt something new. A pain I didn't recognize. Not physical. Deeper than that. Because in that moment, I understood, all the nights I skipped dinner so he could eat, all the mornings I left for work in the dark, came home long after sunset, all of it had somehow failed to teach him the one thing that mattered most. Family takes care of each other. Edna had poisoned that truth. She had made him believe I was a burden, that my struggles were self-inflicted, that helping me wasn't love, it was charity. And while I scrubbed floors and cleaned toilets at 65 just to survive, they lived in luxury, assuming I was being looked after. But I wasn't. And that betrayal wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was realizing that the little boy I once held through nightmares, the teenager I gave everything for, the man I believed in, had forgotten me. Completely. Edna still wouldn't meet my eyes. She was trying to pull herself together, but I saw the panic beneath the surface. And inside me, something shifted. Yes, the sadness was still there. So was the confusion. But underneath it all, something colder had started to form. For the first time in my life, I wasn't worried about what was best for Boyd. I was thinking about what was best for me. The days after the Christmas party blurred into a string of difficult conversations and heavy silence. Boyd insisted on driving me home that night. We sat in his high-end car, parked outside my little duplex. His face was pale, drawn, eyes searching mine like he wanted to turn back time. "Mom, I swear. I didn't know," he said, his voice shaking. His fingers clenched around the steering wheel, white-knuckled. "I've been transferring $5,000 every month. Just like always. To the account Edna set up for you." I nodded, too drained to argue. "I believe you, sweetheart," I murmured. "But we need to find out where it's been going." 3 days later, Boyd called again. This time, his voice was sharper. Tighter. There was an edge to it I hadn't heard in years. "Can I come by?" he asked. When he showed up, he looked like he hadn't slept since the party. His hair was messy. Shirt wrinkled. But his eyes, those eyes I hadn't seen since he was a boy, they looked like they'd finally opened. "We need to talk," he said, walking into my living room and sinking onto my old couch with a thick stack of papers. I poured us coffee in the only 2 mugs I had left, the rest had been sold the year before when I needed to fix my car. He spread the papers across my scratched coffee table, bank records, transfer receipts. "Here," he said, pointing, his finger trembling. "This is the account I've been sending the money to. Every month. For 3 years. Look at the name." I leaned in close. Doreen Elizabeth Crawford. It was my name. But the address? "That's not mine," I said slowly. "I've never seen this account before." Boyd's jaw locked tight. "That address belongs to a mailbox rental on 5th and Harrison," he said quietly. "Edna's been intercepting all the statements." He paused, as if trying to figure out how to say it. "She told me she was handling things for you. Said you were getting older. That you might struggle to manage the money." My breath caught. "She said I was going senile?" "Not in so many words," Boyd muttered, running both hands through his hair. "She said you were proud. That you'd be embarrassed to ask for help. So it'd be better if she managed it quietly." I stared at the statements, my vision blurring. Every month, $5,000 deposited. But the withdrawals, they didn't line up. They told a different story entirely. The money hadn't been tucked away for safekeeping or spent with care. It was gone. Usually within days of hitting the account. "What has she been using it for?" I asked, though part of me already dreaded the answer. Boyd pulled out another stack of papers, credit card bills, receipts he must have collected from their home. Spa appointments, luxury clothing, weekend getaways to wine country with her friends. That high-end gym membership she had to have. The personal trainer. The weekly nail salon visits. Shopping binges. As he read off the list, I felt myself disconnect. Like I was floating just outside of my body, watching it all from a distance. While I'd been skipping meals to afford medication for my aching joints, she was booking $100 facials. While I wore the same winter coat I'd had for nearly a decade, she was collecting designer handbags. While I lay awake worrying about bills, she was living large, off the money my son thought he was sending to help me. Money meant for me. "There's something else," Boyd said, quieter now. And the way his voice shifted made my stomach tighten. I found emails. Messages between Edna and her sister, her friends. He hesitated, bragging about it. He handed me a handful of printed emails. I took them with trembling hands. As I read, something sharp and cold began forming in my chest. One message said, You wouldn't believe how easy it is to manipulate Boyd's guilt over his mother. All I have to do is drop a hint that she's struggling, and he starts throwing money at me. Another one read. Of course, I funnel it toward things we actually need. He thinks his mom is living off it, but she's perfectly fine on her own. She's tougher than she looks. And then? The old woman truly believes Boyd doesn't care anymore. It's ideal. She's too proud to ask directly for help, and Boyd feels like he's doing his part. So I get the benefits, without the burden of a needy mother-in-law always hanging around. But the worst one, the one that broke something inside me, was dated just 2 weeks before Christmas. Boyd keeps talking about inviting his mother for the holidays. I can't bear the thought of her judging everything and making him feel bad for our success. Maybe it's time we just stop the transfers. She's made it this far without them, clearly she doesn't need them. I placed the papers on the coffee table, my hands unsteady. Boyd watched me carefully, his face twisted in a mix of anger, regret, and something close to fear. Mom, he said softly, I'm so sorry. I trusted her. I really believed I was helping you. I glanced around my small living room. The old, second-hand furniture. The worn-out carpet. The drafty windows I couldn't afford to replace. And then I pictured her mansion, the gleaming stone countertops, the chandeliers, rooms bigger than my entire house. Where is she now? I asked. She's at her sister's, Boyd said. She left right after the party. Said she needed time to think. She hasn't answered my calls since. I nodded slowly. Of course she ran. She knew exactly what she'd done. And she knew she'd been caught. The only question now was what her next move would be: deny it all, twist the truth, try to play the victim, or manipulate Boyd into forgiving her. Boyd, I said quietly, choosing my words with care. You need to understand something. This isn't just about the money. He looked confused. What do you mean? She didn't just take from me, I said. She robbed me of you. For 3 years. He frowned. She took your concern, your love, your presence. You thought you were doing right by me, so you didn't ask questions. You didn't check in. You assumed everything was fine because you were sending money. And she made sure I felt forgotten while she lived off your kindness. Boyd's expression crumpled. In that moment, he looked like the little boy who used to bury his face in my arms when life felt too heavy. I abandoned you, he whispered. I let her convince me that wiring money was the same thing as showing up. You didn't know, I said softly. But as I spoke, the weight of it all hit me, years of silence, of wondering why my son never called, never visited. Of wondering why I always felt like an afterthought. I should have known, Boyd said, his voice rising with conviction. I should have seen it. I should have called, visited, asked. I should have seen that you were breaking your back while she lived like a queen. We sat in heavy silence, the enormity of it all sinking in. Finally, Boyd spoke again. His voice was steadier now. Determined. What do you want me to do, Mom? I'll leave her. I'll make sure you get every cent back, with interest. I'll fix this. Just tell me how. And for the first time in years, I really looked at my son. Beneath the designer clothes and polished appearance, I could see the guilt gnawing at him, the raw, stunned realization of what his wife had done. But I also saw something else. A man who had grown used to thinking money was a substitute for love. That writing a check could stand in for showing up, that financial help was the same thing as emotional support. I need some time, I said finally. To think about what I want, what's fair, and what comes next. Boyd gave a small nod, gathering the documents into a neat pile. Of course. Take all the time you need. And Mom? I will make this right. I swear. After he left, I sat alone in my modest living room, surrounded by the proof of Edna's lies. But I wasn't thinking about the money anymore. Not even the betrayal. I was thinking about control, how completely I'd surrendered mine over the years without even noticing. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't focused on what others needed from me. I was thinking about what I wanted. Something Edna had never imagined I'd be capable of. I wanted to fight back. 2 weeks had passed since Boyd had uncovered the truth about the fake bank account, and I'd been quietly digging on my own. At 65, I might not know the ins and outs of technology the way my son does, but I know people. And I know paperwork. Years of scraping by on a tight budget had taught me how to catch small discrepancies, how to notice things that others overlooked. I was sitting at the kitchen table, tea in hand, surrounded by printouts and bank records I'd requested. That's when the phone rang. Boyd's name lit up the screen, and something in the urgency of the call made my chest tighten. "Mom," he said, his voice hoarse and worn. "We need to talk. Can I come over?" "Of course, sweetheart." 20 minutes later, Boyd stood at my door. He looked worse than I'd ever seen him. His face was drawn, his shirt creased, and his posture sagged with a weight that reminded me of the day we buried his father. Beside him stood a woman I didn't recognize. Mid-50s, sharply dressed, holding a briefcase. "Mom, this is Patricia Williams," Boyd said, his tone flat. "She's a forensic accountant. I hired her to dig into Edna's finances. What she found, it's worse than we imagined." Patricia extended a hand, firm grip, professional smile tinged with empathy. "Mrs. Crawford, may we sit? There's quite a lot to go over." We gathered around my small dining table, and Patricia opened her case, spreading out thick folders filled with documents. "When your son first contacted me," she began, "I assumed this was a straightforward case of financial redirection, your daughter-in-law intercepting funds intended for you." She paused, flipping open a file. "But this goes far beyond that." She laid out account statements, credit reports, and legal papers across the table. "Edna didn't just divert money meant for you. She's been manipulating your son's finances, his entire financial life, for years." Boyd leaned forward, hands clasped tightly together. "Mom, she's lied about everything. The house, the cars, the vacations, none of it was what it seemed. She claimed it was for the family, for you." "I don't understand," I said, though the chill crawling up my spine told me I was beginning to. Patricia pointed to a series of highlighted transactions. "Your son has been incredibly generous over the years, Mrs. Crawford. Not just the $5,000 a month he thought you were receiving, but additional money for what Edna claimed were your emergencies, medical bills, car repairs, damage to your home. Constant crises that demanded urgent financial help." I felt the color drain from my face. "What medical bills? What roof damage?" Patricia's expression turned grim. "Exactly. In the last 3 years alone, she claimed you needed over $47,000 in emergency assistance. She told Boyd you needed surgery that your insurance wouldn't cover. That your roof had collapsed in a storm. That you were in a serious car accident and couldn't work." Boyd's voice dropped to a whisper. "I really thought I was helping you through crisis after crisis. Every time I'd wonder why you hadn't called, or why you never said thank you, she'd say you were too ashamed to talk about it. That you asked me not to visit. That you didn't want me to see you like that." Patricia nodded and began reading from what looked like printed emails. "She told him you were emotionally overwhelmed, possibly depressed. That you were embarrassed by your situation and wanted space. She used those lies to keep him away while she funneled more money into her lifestyle." I sat frozen, staring at the paperwork laid out before me. Edna hadn't just taken the monthly support Boyd believed he was giving. She'd fabricated a string of fake emergencies to extract more, and in doing so, had ensured that Boyd kept his distance. That he believed I was suffering silently and wanted to be left alone. "How much?" I asked, my voice barely audible. Patricia flipped through her notes. "When you combine the monthly transfers with the fabricated emergency expenses, it totals approximately $230,000. Over 3 years." The number lingered in the air like a heavy cloud. $230,000. More money than I'd made in the past 6 years combined. Money that could have given me a chance to retire, to live with peace of mind, to stop juggling 2 jobs when I should have been enjoying my later years. There's more, Patricia said gently. And I honestly didn't know if I could take hearing anything else. Mrs. Crawford, are you familiar with the land your late husband inherited? His grandfather's old property? I furrowed my brow. You mean that stretch of land upstate? Robert inherited it years ago, but we never used it. It was just woods and a creek, nothing developed. After Robert passed, I couldn't keep up with the property taxes. I assumed it had been auctioned off years ago. Patricia and Boyd exchanged a glance, one that sent a cold knot forming in my stomach. Mrs. Crawford, Patricia said carefully, the land was never sold for taxes. Your daughter-in-law has been paying those taxes herself for the last 3 years. She even ordered a full land survey and commissioned an environmental study. My heart sank. Why would she do that? I asked, though some part of me already feared the answer. Because the state has plans to expand the highway system, and that land sits directly in its projected path. It will be purchased by the government through eminent domain. And the projected payout is between $12 and $18 million. The room tilted. I grabbed the edge of the table to steady myself. You're telling me that land could be worth over $1 million? Yes, ma'am, Patricia confirmed. And legally, as your husband's widow, the deed is still yours. You're the rightful owner. But Edna has been setting herself up to claim it. She's been paying taxes, maintaining the land, building a paper trail that gives the impression it's hers. Boyd's face had gone pale. She's been planning this for years, Mom. While she was stealing from you, isolating you, making sure I stayed away, she was quietly moving in on your inheritance, too. I thought about all the times I'd wondered about that land, all the guilt I'd carried for letting it go. Robert had cherished that place. His grandfather had cleared it with his own 2 hands, built a tiny cabin that had long since collapsed. I'd always meant to go back and check on it, but there had never been time or money to make the trip. She's been going there, Patricia added. Clearing brush, grading the access road, even surveying the old cabin's foundation. All in her name. On paper, it looks like she's been the caretaker for years. Can she actually take it? I asked, dreading the answer. Not if we act quickly, Patricia replied. But she's been smart. She's creating a case for adverse possession. If this had continued much longer, she might have had a real legal claim. I leaned back, stunned by the scale of what Edna had done. This wasn't just about stolen money or manipulating Boyd's love. She had been methodically working to steal the one meaningful thing Robert left behind. There's something else, Patricia said, her tone even more cautious now. And I need to say this carefully. She paused. We discovered that Edna has been looking into your medical records, your insurance coverage, and actuarial life expectancy data. Boyd let out a noise, like he'd been physically struck. What kind of research? He asked, voice shaking. The kind someone does when they're planning around future inheritance timing, Patricia said softly. The implication landed like a slap. She hadn't just been draining my accounts and plotting to take my property. She'd been calculating how long I might live, and planning for what she could collect when I was gone. I looked at Boyd, my son who thought he had been supporting me all these years. His face was tight with pain, fury, and a dawning horror at how completely he'd been misled. Boy, I said gently, you need to hear me, this isn't your fault. He opened his mouth, but I raised my hand to stop him. Your wife is a predator. She saw someone with money and a kind heart, and she used that against you. She saw me as someone with no safeguards and valuable assets, and she used that, too. This wasn't a spontaneous betrayal. It was a long-term strategy, carried out with focus and patience. But I should have noticed, he whispered. I should have visited. Called more. Paid attention. Yes, I said simply. You should have. But that doesn't make you the criminal here. Her actions are her own. We sat in silence for a few moments, absorbing it all. Then Patricia leaned in. Mrs. Crawford, how would you like to proceed? We have enough for criminal charges, civil litigation, and to lock in your legal ownership of the property. But the next step is entirely your decision. I looked down at the papers on the table, hard evidence of the most deliberate betrayal I'd ever experienced. Then I looked up at Boyd. His eyes held guilt, yes, but also something else. Hope. I need time to think, I said. But Patricia, I want you to start whatever legal process is necessary to secure my ownership of that land. Today, if you can. Absolutely, she nodded. After they left, I walked through my small house with different eyes. It wasn't just a modest home anymore. It was a record of everything I'd been denied. Every faded sofa cushion, every outdated appliance, every late bill, they all told the story of how well Edna had played her game. But that story wasn't over. I was done playing the victim. For the first time in decades, I had leverage, and I wasn't going to waste it. 3 days later, Boyd called early in the morning. His voice was tight, brimming with emotion. Mom, he said. Edna's back. She wants to meet, with both of us. Says she can explain everything. I was sitting at the kitchen table again, same spot where the truth had unraveled. My coffee had gone cold, untouched. In front of me were the documents Patricia had rushed through, official papers naming me as the legal owner of Robert's land, along with a preliminary appraisal, $6 million. Where does she want to meet? I asked calmly. At the house, Boyd said. She says it's her home, too. And she has the right to talk on familiar ground. Of course she did. Even now, even cornered, she wanted the advantage. To be on her turf, surrounded by the luxury she'd built with what she stole from me. But those days were over. No, I said, voice steady. If she wants a conversation, it happens at Patricia's office, with lawyers present. This isn't a family conversation anymore, Boyd. This is a legal issue now. He was quiet for a beat. She's not going to take that well. I don't care what she takes well. 2 hours later, I was seated in Patricia's conference room, wearing my navy dress, the same one I'd worn to last year's Christmas party. But it felt different now. Back then, it had felt like trying to impress. Today, it felt like armor. Boyd sat beside me, his attorney on his other side. Across the gleaming table were Edna and her lawyer, a slick-looking man in a suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. He kept glancing at his phone like he had somewhere more important to be. Edna looked wrecked. Her usually flawless blonde hair was frizzy and pinned haphazardly. Her makeup couldn't hide the shadows under her eyes. Even her designer outfit looked wrong on her, like she was playing dress-up in someone else's life. But when our eyes met, I saw it, that familiar flicker of calculation. She was still playing the game. Doreen, she began softly, her voice coated in apology. I know how all of this must seem, but I need you to believe that everything I did with the best of intentions. Patricia leaned forward slightly, pen poised over her notepad. Just a reminder, Mrs. Crawford, this conversation is being recorded, with everyone's signed consent. Edna's lawyer gave a short nod. Edna hesitated, just a breath, before continuing. I only wanted to spare Boyd the guilt, she said, her eyes locking onto mine with a look that might have passed for sincerity. You're so independent. So proud. Every time he tried to help, you'd push him away. I thought, if I handled the finances quietly, you could keep your dignity while still getting support. I kept my face blank, but a slow burn rose in my chest. Even now, after everything, she was twisting the story to paint herself as the noble one. And the property taxes? Patricia asked, voice cool. Were you covering those as part of your dignity campaign? Edna flinched slightly. I was protecting a family asset. Boyd is Robert's stepson, and when Doreen. I'm not Robert's stepson, Boyd cut in, his voice sharp. He adopted me when I was 7. I'm his son. And that land doesn't belong to us, it belongs to my mother. Edna turned toward him with a familiar look I'd seen her use more times than I could count, wide-eyed, imploring, just on the edge of tears. Sweetheart, I know you're upset. I get it. But we have to think about the bigger picture. That property's going to require serious oversight when the state starts acquisition. We need to think about what comes next. You were planning to manage that transition? Patricia asked, eyebrows raised. For a significant fee, I imagine? Edna's lawyer tried to interject, placing a warning hand on her arm. She ignored him. I was trying to make sure Boyd's future inheritance was handled properly. Doreen doesn't have experience with complex financial matters. That's when it happened. Something in me didn't snap, it settled. Clicked into place with a cold, perfect clarity. Edna, I said, voice calm, almost quiet, but steady. I want you to listen carefully. She looked at me. And for the first time I saw something new in her eyes, doubt. I've spent the last 3 days thinking about what you've done. The money you siphoned off. The emergencies you faked. The lies you told to keep Boyd from calling, from visiting. The way you maneuvered to take what Robert left behind. I paused, letting the words land. But more than that, I've been thinking about how you made me feel these past 3 years. How you made me believe my son didn't care. How you weaponized his kindness to isolate me. You didn't just steal, you took my relationship with my son and twisted it into something cold and distant. Edna's expression flickered, uncertain, pale, but she still clung to the mask. Doreen, I never meant to. You meant every bit of it, I said, still controlled. You wanted me alone. You wanted Boyd convinced he was doing his part without ever having to truly see me. That served you. And you orchestrated it beautifully. I stood, Patricia's documents clutched in my hand. Boyd, I said, turning to face him, you've offered to fix this. To repay the money. To walk away from Edna. To start over. Boyd nodded, eyes shining. Anything you need, Mom. I don't want your money, I said. The shock on his face was immediate. I don't want you to divorce your wife for me. I don't need you to tear your life apart just because she did everything she could to wreck mine. Edna's expression shifted, like hope had found a crack to slip through. But I wasn't finished. What I want, I said, laying the property documents on the table, is something else entirely. I looked him in the eye. I want you to choose. Honestly. Deliberately. I want you to decide who you want to be, and what kind of life you want to build from here. Not out of guilt. Not out of obligation. But because it's the life you believe in. I'm about to become a very wealthy woman, I said. The land your wife tried to steal from me? It's valued at over $1.5 million. I don't need your money anymore. And I don't need your guilt, either. Boyd looked at me, part hopeful, part confused. What do you need, Mom? I need you to make a decision. Decide whether you want a relationship with me built on love and respect, or if you're content staying in a marriage founded on deception and control. I looked straight at Edna. Her face had gone ghostly pale. Because here's what's coming next. I'm selling that property. I'll use the proceeds to build a life that's mine and mine alone. I'll quit both my jobs. I'll move somewhere beautiful, somewhere I can finally breathe. I picked up my purse and stood. And Edna, I added, turning to her, I'm going to make sure the people in your world, your friends, your relatives, your little social circle, know who you really are. Not through some public smear campaign, but through quiet, truthful conversations with the people who matter to you. Edna's attorney was scribbling notes like a man on a deadline. Edna looked like she might collapse. But I'm not going to press criminal charges, I continued. And I won't be suing you for the money you took. Want to know why? She gave a tiny, terrified shake of her head. Because the sweetest revenge isn't destroying you, it's thriving without you. It's living a full, beautiful life while you wake up every day remembering what you did. I turned back to Boyd one final time. If you want a relationship with me, it has to be real. No more secret payments. No more gestures fueled by guilt. Just love. Just mutual respect. A true connection between a mother and son who choose to show up for each other. Boyd rose to his feet, his eyes wet. That's all I want, Mom. More than anything. Then you know what comes next. And I walked out of that conference room feeling lighter than I had in years. Behind me, I could hear Edna's voice rising, high-pitched and panicked, pleading with Boyd, insisting I was overreacting, promising she'd change, that their marriage was worth saving. But I didn't look back. For the first time in my adult life, I was walking toward my future, not cleaning up someone else's mess. And it felt like freedom. 18 months later, I was sitting on the wraparound porch of my new home in Asheville, North Carolina, sipping coffee while the morning mist curled up from the Blue Ridge Mountains. The house wasn't massive, but I'd learned peace doesn't come from square footage. What mattered was that it was mine, paid for outright with the money from the sale of Robert's land. Every morning, I came out to this same spot. Coffee in hand, heart steady, grateful for a life built on my terms. The state ended up buying the land for $1.7 million, more than even Patricia had predicted. After taxes and legal costs, there was enough to buy this home, create a secure retirement, and still have room for comfort I'd never dared imagine. My phone buzzed beside me. A text from Boyd. Good morning, Mom. Hope you're enjoying this weather. Sarah and I are planning to drive down this weekend. Are you free for dinner? Sarah, Boyd's new partner. A nurse with a warm heart and a genuine smile. She treated me like a person, not a burden. The first time Boyd brought her around, I'd watched closely, half expecting a repeat of the same subtle manipulation Edna had mastered. But Sarah was different. She listened. She asked real questions. She helped with the dishes not out of performance, but instinct. Nothing about her felt like strategy. I typed back. I'd love that. I'll make my famous pot roast. It took Boyd 6 months after that conference room meeting to finally leave Edna. 6 months of trying to salvage something broken beyond repair. Marriage counseling. Wild mood swings. Tearful apologies followed by angry blame. I stayed out of it completely. For the first time in decades, I focused only on me. When Boyd finally called to say he'd filed for divorce, his voice sounded tired, but free. She fought me on everything, Mom. Ask ChatGPT. The house, the vehicles, she even tried to argue she deserved a share of your property settlement because she'd managed the household finances for years. In the end, Edna walked away from the divorce with only what the law strictly allowed, half of the assets that truly belonged to Boyd, none of the money she had taken from me, and certainly not a dime from my settlement. Her attorney made a weak attempt to argue that she was owed compensation for financial caregiving, but Patricia tore that argument apart with her signature, ice-cold precision. Last I heard, Edna was living in a modest apartment across town and working as a receptionist in a dental clinic. It wasn't some dramatic fall from grace, but a quiet, slow fade into the kind of ordinary life she used to sneer at. Boyd occasionally mentioned spotting her around town, older, wearier, harder somehow, but they didn't speak. I'd kept my word, no criminal charges. But I'd also kept another promise, making sure people saw her for who she truly was. There was no scandal, no loud accusations. Just simple, honest conversations. In a small town, the truth travels faster than gossip ever could. When friends asked why Boyd had left her, I told the truth. When someone brought up why she'd moved out of that oversized mansion, I explained, quietly, about the stolen funds and the forged signatures. Turns out, truth is a far more effective reckoning than revenge. Mrs. Patterson, my neighbor, stepped out onto her porch just then. She waved as she made her way to her garden. She's 82, a widow like me. Over the past year, she's become a kind of friend I never used to have time for, back when I was juggling 2 jobs and trying to keep my head above water. We'd swap recipes, watch old black and white films, and sometimes just sit on our porches in companionable silence. "Good morning, Doreen," she called. "Perfect day for coffee, don't you think?" "Best weather we've had all week," I replied, smiling to myself at how much joy I now found in simple things. I'd quit both my jobs the day the land sale went through. Walking out of that grocery store for the last time, hanging up that worn-out cashier's vest, felt like shedding a skin I no longer needed. Leaving the cleaning job had been even easier. I called the company and said simply, "I'm retiring." Retirement. At 66, I was finally living the life most people begin in their early 60s, one filled not with survival, but with peace, purpose, and time. I'd picked up painting, something I'd always wanted to try but never could. My little studio now sits where the formal dining room used to be. The easel catches the morning mountain light perfectly. I'm not great at it. And that's the beauty of it. I finally have the time to not be great at something. The time to learn, to explore, to create simply because it brings me joy. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. Patricia's name lit up the screen. "Good morning, Patricia," I answered. "Please tell me you're not calling about more legal headaches." She laughed, warm and familiar. "No legal drama, Doreen. Just good news. Remember that class action suit against the financial firm Edna used to hide your money? Of course. They've settled. It's not a fortune, about $12,000 for you, but that's not the best part. They've also agreed to add stronger protections to stop this kind of fraud from happening again. $12,000 wouldn't change my life now. But knowing that others might be spared what I'd gone through, that was a different kind of win." "That's incredible," I said. "There's more," Patricia went on. "A legal aid nonprofit reached out. They're seeing more and more cases like yours, spouses manipulating finances, isolating aging parents. They'd love for you to share your story, maybe help develop some resources for families facing the same thing." I sat with that for a moment. A year ago, I wouldn't have dared. The thought of opening that wound publicly would have been too much. But now, with the distance and the stability I'd earned, it felt different. It felt like purpose. "I'd be open to hearing more," I said. After we hung up, I stayed seated, taking in the quiet view from my porch. The strange, painful journey that brought me here had also set me free. What had once felt like devastation had become a path to something better. The son I thought I'd lost had come back, not out of guilt, but because he chose to. The money I never knew existed didn't just give me security, it gave me agency. Boyd's car pulled into the drive as I finished my second cup of coffee. He stepped out alone. Sarah must have stayed behind for work, and made his way toward me with the easy pace of a man who'd laid down a heavy load. "Morning, Mom," he said, dropping into the chair beside mine. "Sarah's sorry, she got called into the hospital last minute. Promises to make it up to you next weekend." "She doesn't owe me anything," I replied. "I love that she takes her work seriously." We sat in silence for a few minutes, both of us watching the mountains in the distance. Eventually, Boyd spoke. "I've been thinking about Dad. About what he'd make of all this." I smiled gently. "He'd be proud of you, Boyd. Proud of the way you handled it all, once you saw what was happening. And he'd be so glad to know his grandfather's land finally took care of his family, just like the old man always wanted." Boyd looked down, his voice quieter. "Do you think he would have seen through Edna faster than I did?" It was a question Boyd had asked in different ways throughout the past year, and I understood the guilt that lingered beneath it. But over time, I'd come to understand something important about forgiveness, not the kind you offer to others, but the kind you give yourself. "Your father was a good man," I said gently. "But he wasn't a mind reader, sweetheart. Even the smartest people can be deceived by someone who knows how to manipulate. What matters is that you saw the truth and made the right decision in the end." Boyd nodded slowly, but I could see the weight still sitting on his shoulders. "Listen to me," I said, my voice soft but firm. "What happened with Edna wasn't your fault. But more than that, it wasn't all for nothing. Those 3 years we spent apart, full of distance and misunderstanding, they taught us something valuable. He turned toward me, curious. They showed us that our relationship can't be built on guilt or duty or some sense of responsibility. It has to be built on choice. Every time we talk now, every message, every visit, that's us choosing each other. Not out of obligation, but out of love. His eyes filled with tears. I want to be in your life, Mom. Not to make up for the past, but because I truly enjoy being around you. I love hearing about your art classes, your porch chats with Mrs. Patterson, how you're finally living a life that makes you happy. And I love the man you'd become, I told him. Not just the professional success, though I'm proud of that, too. But the man who had the courage to walk away from something that was slowly breaking him. The man who chose truth over comfort. We sat there quietly, letting the silence stretch between us like a warm blanket. And I found myself thinking about the strange arithmetic of life, how loss and gain often live side by side. I'd lost 3 years with my son, a sizable amount of money, and the comforting lie that family loyalty always means something. But in return, I'd gained real freedom, peace of mind, and a bond with Boyd that was more honest and more meaningful than anything we'd had before. As the sun rose higher over the mountains, I felt a kind of satisfaction I'd never known. Not the teary-eyed gratitude of someone who's been thrown a lifeline, but the deep, steady peace of someone who fought for their own future and won. At 67, I was finally secure, financially and emotionally. I was surrounded by people who chose to love me, not people who merely put up with me. I had time to paint badly, time to savor my morning coffee, time to watch the leaves change from the comfort of my own front porch. It had taken nearly 70 years to learn the greatest truth of all, that the best kind of revenge isn't about payback, it's about thriving. It's about living with so much peace, joy, and authenticity that those who tried to hurt you become nothing more than a footnote in your story. And for the first time in my life, that's exactly what I was doing. Now I want to hear from you, the one listening to my story. What would you have done if you were in my shoes? Have you ever gone through something like this? Leave a comment below. And while you're here, I've left 2 more stories on the final screen, some of the most powerful ones we've shared on this channel. I think they'll surprise you. Thanks for sticking with me to the end.